we're going to think of something, and we're going to pair up and talk about it, and then we're going to share it. We've done that a couple times. What I want you to do is I want you to think about an animal that represents a classroom or a training room when the teacher or trainer does not teach from a well-planned lesson or does not use strategies to engage your student. So think of an animal that represents, I didn't plan real well for whatever reason, I didn't use these strategies, I'm just doing one-way lesson. Think of an animal that represents that in your mind.
Got one?
Yeah.
And as soon as you have an animal, then I want you to share with your partner
I went the other
or
way.
your neighbor what your animal is. And then we'll share out.
So last night we went to see Lion King as a family, so I would say meerkat. And so meerkats are just like everywhere, you know, all different places.
If you don't want to use,
So
you
you
can't
went
think of
super
one for
slow, I
you
went, like-
necessarily. Think about a
Yeah.
classroom that one of
I
your
don't like
kids is
distracted,
in.
yeah.
Don't tell us the classroom. But, or a classroom that you've seen when you visited a school or when you were in high school or elementary school.
Either way is an effective.
Yeah.
All right, what did we get?
Well, we had two different animals.
Okay, what are your answers?
My animal was a sloth.
A sloth.
It's just like the students are just really bored when the
Yeah.
teacher doesn't know what they're gonna
Lethargic,
teach.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very
And
good.
I went the complete opposite end, partly because I saw Lion King last night with the family.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
was
yeah.
it good?
It was good, it was good, yeah. Good memories for the
Yeah.
boys, so.
That's,
Meerkat, so hyper distracted, you know, everywhere and nobody can follow.
yeah, good, good. What else?
We were thinking about the monkeys that are bouncing through the trees. The small monkeys, right? The ones that are just
Yeah,
swatting.
they're everywhere.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
I think of a cat. Cats tend to be more independent, less communal. They're harder to interact with, so more self-focused.
Okay, that's good. We're done. Anybody else want to share? Jess, how do you want to talk to? Did you have a good one?
Squirrel.
A squirrel? A rabid squirrel or a happy squirrel?
Typical squirrel.
Your typical squirrel. So squirrely, right? Jason, do you have something different? No?
Rob?
Bob?
No, I was thinking cat too.
You think cat too? Okay.
Do
All right.
everything.
So this isn't really cooperative learning, but what we're doing is we're interacting with our people and talking and having a little social interaction. Okay, so on page 3 of your work packet, I have a, what was this called? Started with a G? A picture that helps us see it? Yeah? Jeff, you got the first word?
Graphic organizer.
Yeah, graphic organizer, okay. So what I've done is I've got a graphic organizer, and we're going to use a little non-linguistic representation because we're going to think and we're going to picture something. So you got to have your drawing skills out. Jeff, I understand you're an artist. So what I want you to do in this first box is I want you to draw a symbol or a picture, doesn't have to be fancy, of what that classroom looks like or your training looks like in the group that you're training. If you haven't planned anything and you haven't had any, you don't do any teaching strategies, what's something that comes to mind that kind of would demonstrate that, or not demonstrate, but that you could draw it to represent it. And in the middle, I want you to put a picture or a symbol of a training that you would do or somebody do that's well planned and well organized, and you've got strategies and kids are engaged and they're thinking of higher level thinking skills, using higher level thinking skills, solving problems. And then the third one is a picture of a class that's high engagement. You don't have to be an artist, it doesn't have to be a picture, it can be a symbol. Okay. I've had people do light bulbs. Yeah. Happy faces, groups of happy faces. Something, you gotta kind of think through that. Having to use your imagination, your creativity, having you picture something. That you would to represent a point that I'm trying to make for you. Don't forget to make your list of the strategies I'm using.
hitting his head against the desk.
Have you ever seen one of the things I use sometimes is a clip from Ferris Bueller's The Hour?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And then the students are like,
Right.
and the one's drool on one's popping up. That's a really, really good
Exactly.
little clip to show. I know all of you don't have something in every box, and I'm not going to ask you to show your pictures or anything, but I've seen some pretty interesting pictures. I see, and I am going to ask Jeff a little bit. He has in his first one an anchor, his second one a sailboat, and his third one a fish? A rocket. A rocket.
Oh,
It does look like a rocket, not a
That's a
fish.
good drawing, yeah.
So that one I'm not really exactly sure, so can you explain, do you mind explaining that one? The three that you have, anchor?
Well, when there's no planning, no teaching strategies, things just kind of drag along, it's all weighted down, it's not really going anywhere. It's hindered, well planned, with teaching strategies, you're headed somewhere, you've got full wind in the sails, and so you've got a certain direction, certain destiny you're going to. As far as a rocket ship, and you've got high engagement, that's, you're shooting for the moon, shooting for the stars, you're getting up there, people are engaged, and things are going well.
I like that, I like that. I see a mess in the third one, classify engagement, not a mess. I see interaction, is that what that is?
Chaos.
Oh, is that chaos when they're highly engaged? Okay, so that brings up a really good point, Tom, thank you. So a lot of times teachers, especially our more seasoned teachers have been doing it for a long, long time, who learned it a different way years and years ago, they feel like for our students to be engaged in us, to have a good classroom, it needs to be organized and quiet, and everybody's sitting in rows, and everybody's listening quietly. Kind of like Laura Ingalls Wilder Day, you know? But, so, some of the most engaging classrooms where the students are the most engaged and learning the most are not quiet. They're noisy, and they're a little bit more, can I show this picture? You want?
Sure.
They're a little bit more like this. This is where the kids are learning now. There's a difference between this when it's not managed and this when it's managed by the teacher. I'm going to give you an example of a teacher that has a classroom like that where the kids are up and around and busy. And any of you who have kids in Harrisville School might know her. Candy Knox teaches 6th grade at HMS, and she teaches science. And her kids are up and moving, and of course they've got bell ringers, and they've got assessment going on, and they know what they're going to do. Everybody knows what their job is, and they're up, and it is just one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And she takes kids that are not necessarily being successful in other classrooms or being behavior problems, and she gets them focused and gets them thinking and gives them a chance to be up, because kids sometimes, especially middle school kids, they cannot just, we have a hard enough time, let alone a middle school kids sitting there and learning about science, you know, listening to the teacher. So I like that, I like that. I've seen some other things. I've seen, back here was a student that was banging his head against the desk. In the first picture. So basically what I was trying to do with this strategy is to have you really think about it and think about what it looks like and then put it down so that we can have a little short discussion on it. So another strategy. All right, I want you to think back to high school. I don't think it was too long ago for most of you, but think back to high school. Think about who, you don't have to say it out loud, but who was your favorite teacher? And think about who was your teacher you learned the most from? Your favorite teacher and the one you learned the most from. My favorite teacher was hard. One of my favorite teachers was Herb Crow. He was, did anybody go to Harrisonville High School here? Maybe, okay. Oh, did you? When did you graduate?
2004.
Okay, very young. Okay, so Herb was a long time ago before you. He was a band teacher, and he was so cool, we loved him. As a matter of fact, in guitar class, he would give us his keys, and we could take his car and go to the donut shop. And leave and come back and give donuts. And he was so cool, we just loved him, right? He was my favorite teacher. He was my favorite teacher. My other favorite teacher that I learned the most from was Donna Schmall. And she was gone too by the time you were there. She was so classy, and she taught accounting and upper level accounting and shorthand. We did shorthand back then. And she was amazing. We didn't fear her, but we had so much respect for her, we really wanted to do well for her. They were two totally different teachers. I respected her so much, and to this day, I have a lot of respect for her. And her, you know, as a high school kid, that was cool. We got the teacher's car keys. Can you imagine if we did that now? The teacher said, here's the keys, go get donuts during class and come back. Oh my gosh. So do any of you want to share your favorite teacher and the one you respected the most, and if they were the same? Anybody want to share?
Yeah. My favorite teacher was Steve Perry. He was actually, he taught, he was a music teacher, so advanced music theory, choir, all that. And yeah, I learned the most from him. He was my favorite, and it was because of his personal engagement. He was very interested in all of his students on a personal level.
That relationship piece.
Yes.
Anybody else?
Ironically, so I've had lots of classes, but I don't remember very many teachers from, I wasn't engaged in high school at all. I was working 3 jobs and just kind of very, very minimally engaged. But I do remember one teacher, was a math teacher, and he would walk up and down the aisles with his finger over his mouth like this, and then all of a sudden he'd turn and look at your work.
Oh.
You'd be like scared of the worst coffee breath in the world. No one wanted to get near him.
So is he your favorite or your
No, worst.
Oh, worst, okay.
We haven't got to the worst ones yet.
No, the best teacher, one of the best was Wayne Williams from UCM. I don't know if you remember Wayne, but he was very engaging and brought it down to a practical level to where you were, and so I enjoyed that where I could apply what I'm learning, and it made sense, it was relevant.
When you think back about those teachers, the ones that were not very effective, that you didn't like for whatever reason, the ones you liked, the ones that you respected, the ones that were fun, the let you do cool things that you shouldn't do. When you think back, that's going to help you in terms of knowing what should I do, what shouldn't I do, what helped me, what engaged me. I've also had a lot of teachers over the year. We all have, and we've observed a lot of teachers too. So if you can take some of those memories of what worked, how they made you feel. How many of you can think of a teacher that really made you feel good? That made you feel accepted, or they listened to you, or they looked you in the eye? You know, those relationships and those feelings that teachers give you help students. Sometimes students don't get any positive reinforcement at home, but when they come to school, they get positive reinforcement. That one thing that you say to a kid, high school, college, elementary, especially high school, middle school kids, that one thing that you say to them one day that you don't even realize you said, they will remember 10 years later. So.
And I would draw it back just because of the topic, back to Jesus. I'm always looking at the teaching methods that Jesus did, and the ones that we use today in schools is what he was doing. So it's really pretty fascinating. I mean, the stuff that people are coming on, this is the latest research, and I'm going, no, it's not.
They don't want to say that this is the way that Jesus did it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the nice thing about this. The Bible is
Yeah.
interesting, and we can compare that and have relationships to that. So maybe I should have you co-teach, so you can kind of bring some.
No, I need
You can bring some of those
Yeah.
things to it that I can. So, but thank you for doing that. Yeah, please talk to me about how it relates to what you're doing, or how it doesn't relate. So, okay. So on page 4 of your work packet, we're going to do a little strategy. It's called a free write, and typically you might do 5 minutes. You don't want to do too much time because you'll lose your students, especially if you have young students. You all have older students, more mature students in terms of not high school or middle school, and so you'll have their attention a little bit longer. So basically in this box, what I want you to do is I want you to write. It doesn't have to be complete sentences. It doesn't have to be perfect punctuation, because I'm just having you kind of brainstorm and write. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes, and you're going to write. You do not have to answer these questions, but I've given you some questions to give you some thoughts about things you might say. So I want you to describe an experience that you had as a teacher or a trainer, and when a lesson that you taught was not well received, or by participants, and your participants weren't necessarily paying attention. Maybe you had some that were talking, texting, falling asleep, you know, things that you could tell, because I don't know about you, but there have been some times, years ago when I was a teacher, and I could tell my students were not engaged. They were turned off about what I was talking about. They had just turned me off. They weren't listening. They weren't interested. And I think that's really, a couple times when that happens, that gave me the motivation to figure out, what do I need to do to engage these students? It doesn't have to be a subject that they necessarily are interested in. That's a bonus. I took biology in high school under Harold Curtis, and I had no interest in biology or science. That was one of the best classes I ever had because it was so engaging, and he was such a good teacher, and he used a lot of strategies to engage us. Unbelievable. So, you have 3 minutes. Describe an experience you had as a teacher in which a lesson you taught was not received well, and you could tell by their body language and that type of thing. So here's some things that will help guide. Again, you don't have to answer all these, but you know, what were the students doing that made you realize that? How'd you feel when you were standing up there delivering that lesson? Did you plan it? Had you given them an objective? Did you have assessment or activities? What was the environment of the classroom? Did the students enjoy the lesson and meet the objective? So you've got 3 minutes. I'm going to set the timer on my phone, and I just want you to write. Just whatever thoughts are in your head pouring out, I just want you to write. I'm not going to ask you to read it, so don't worry about that. 3 minutes. You have 1 minute left. Okay, you can stop. Okay, so what I did with this strategy is I caused you to think and to summarize. I caused you to think about what it felt like, what you might do different next time. It caused you to stop and to gather your thoughts based on some of the things that we've already talked about and learned, and to reflect on them. This is a strategy maybe, when you're teaching from the Bible, and especially if you have students in a class and they're sitting and they can write. If you're preaching in front of your congregation on Sunday, they're not going to have something to write with, so that might not be necessarily something you can use in. But here's an example of something that doesn't cost money. You don't have to have a neat little piece of paper like I do with the lines on it. Everybody grab a piece of paper, get your pens out. I want you to take the next 3 minutes or 5 minutes. You see how I did 3 minutes, and that was probably long enough? 5 minutes might be a little bit long. So it's just a way to have them stop and summarize and reflect, and to concentrate on some of the things that we've talked about, and then get some feedback from you. So can anybody think of a situation or a lesson you might be teaching where you might use this strategy in your work? Do you want to share, Randy?
Well, I know when we start HBI next month, I'm teaching the Book of Acts, and I've taught it several times before, and there's just so much material, and we're just kind of just pushing it out. But I have a little bit more time this year, so I'm going to try to use some different things to not make it so much just kind of described as a fire hose, and not make it that way. So things like this, like summarizing each chapter when we finish them, would be beneficial for the students.
And you can do 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes. And some of these strategies do take a little bit of time, but also think about if I'm up here and I'm going to lecture for an hour, how long into that hour do you think maybe I might lose some of my students in terms of, they might be looking at you, but their mind might be wandering. So, yeah, right. So when they get that glazed look in their face, right, in their eyes.
And I think that a challenge for teachers a lot, I know you saw this, is do I cover the material or do I make sure the students get it? And that's a struggle. But what's the real point is that they get it and they're able to take something with them, or that you've just gone through it and they can say, well, I've been through it, I don't really know it.
Right, because the whole purpose is for them to know it. And I feel comfortable sharing this, my teachers would have been comfortable too. My adult program in the Career Center is Practical Nursing Program. And my practical nursing teachers were all BSN teachers or RN teachers. They were BSN or RN trained, and they were teaching students in the LPN program. And that's the way they felt. Their mindset was, I have this much material, and I have to say everything, I have to cover everything. But what was happening was their students weren't necessarily scoring well on their indicator tests to understand that, to know that formative assessment, to know if they were getting it. So we did a lot of work with them on how can I, when I'm lecturing and covering things, how can I get them to be more engaged mentally, physically and socially, which we'll talk about in a minute. But what can I do? Because what they said was, well, that takes a lot of time and we've got so much to cover. Well, that's true, but if you cover that and all the words come out of your mouth, but they don't listen after the first 15 minutes, then you're not doing them any favors anyway. So you've got to figure out how you can incorporate some of those things. So that was a good point. Anything else? Anybody else think you might be able to use this? If you're teaching a concept or a theory, if you're teaching about, how about you're teaching about Jesus being a teacher? And you say, okay, I want everybody to get a pencil out, and for 1 minute, I want you to write and reflect on things that you've read in the Bible where Jesus has taught a lesson. Get them to talk about just what a lesson he's taught. And then you can stop and after a minute and say, okay, let's talk about these. If he was teaching that lesson, how did he teach it? What ways did he use to teach it? And get them to start thinking, oh, gosh, he was using this strategy. No, that's not what you're teaching them, but as an example.
Randy does a thing called minute words at the end of his sessions.
Minute words?
Yeah, where they just summarize what you learned.
At the end, after the class is over with, I have them write a short paragraph of what they got from that class. Whether it was a question that they had that they couldn't get answered, or this is what I got out of this, or you know, positive or negative or anything like that. And if it was a question, I tried to respond to all the students so that everybody could get the
So
answer.
do they write that on pencil and paper, or do they write it on the computer?
Well, it used to be pencil and paper, and they turn it in at the end, you know, right after class is over. But the last couple of years, it's been email.
So you get those.
Yeah.
And what do you think we call that? You're gonna know later. It's summary, right? It's
Yeah,
causing them to
just-
summarize, which
right.
is helpful. But it's also formative assessment, because what Randy's done is he's had them write down some things that they got out of it. He's gonna read that, and once you read all those at the end of the day, what are you gonna do with that information?
Well, I process it by making sure that I've covered the material, or if it indicates that they didn't understand what I was talking about, I go back and redo it, or just try to clarify in some way, either immediately or in the next class.
That is formative assessment, which we're gonna talk about sometime.
I do a similar thing, but I drill down, I use it to drill down, which is probably what you're talking about. Instead of the general, what did you get, I'm usually asking specifically, name the 3 things.
So let me ask you, if you said, okay, at the end of every day, at the end of every chapter, we're gonna do a quiz. Because I really wanna know what you know and what you don't, what you're getting and what you're not. Your students are gonna be like, I got a quiz. But if you have something that's a little more unofficial, more relaxing, where they're sharing, they're summarizing, they're taking that information, they're putting it in sentences, and then you're using that, you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it in a different environment with a different feeling.
The last class that I taught, I actually tried to make that into more of a forum post type of thing where all the students had to respond. So one student would create a thread and all the other students respond to it. And so there'd get some dialogue going
A
on.
discussion board.
Yeah.
And you use Moodle, is that what you said?
Mhm. Yeah, and it worked out pretty well. Still trying to figure out how to make it as seamless as possible, but for the most part, it worked pretty well.
And make it interactive.
Yeah. Yeah, I got good comments, and then of course I could comment on their comments.
Yeah, it's amazing what we can do electronically now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, I just found this, I thought it was kind of cute. Math teacher. Oh,
That's how I felt in math class, algebra, geometry, all of this stuff. That's why I
It's like me teaching the Warriors.
I was at a middle school last year, not in Harrisonville, in another town, and I was like, and they knew, and there was a group of us in, we were doing a curriculum instruction review, and we were doing classroom observations, and I went into a classroom and they had all these people there, not evaluating, but basically would find out where their strengths are, some areas for improvement, and we would be invited in, and then we'd give them a report, and then we'd help them do a goal on what they would, want to do to get better, and they get to pick and choose. But we were in there, and one of the classes I was in, students were like standing up on the chairs and throwing paper balls, and I just kept thinking, what are they doing when we're not, I guess the same thing when we're not in here. But it was just I was very, very uncomfortable. And I thought, oh, it's middle school. It's middle school, it's middle school. Well, then I went into another classroom, and those kids were engaged, they were interested, the teacher was organized, and it was like, it's not middle school, it's teacher. So that teacher just had a lot to learn in terms of, needed some skills and some left behind that. So. Okay, high quality instruction is focused, it's engaging, it's challenging. Sometimes we take our lowest, our students that have the lowest knowledge, the least knowledge, or the lowest skills, some of our special needs students, and we challenge them. We don't water it down, we challenge them, and they rise to the occasion. Considerate of learning differences, which we're going to talk about after break. Project-based and problem-based learning. Basically, if it's one thing to just give them all that information, but we've got to come up with, our students have to learn the skill of how do we work through problems. So this morning when I got here, I hope it's okay that we share this, Brian, so we got some challenges going on. We've got, some technical problems here, and we've had some, things go on in our church that are requiring a little bit extra. So do you have problems in your job? Or do we have problems that we have to solve in our jobs? Yeah, you see? So we have to teach our students how to solve problems. So even in what you're teaching, in the lessons you're teaching in, from the Bible, we have to teach our students how to solve problems. So if our students are wanting to be ordained preachers or pastors, then that's something that they need to learn. And we can teach them problem solving by teaching them all the things that are in our curriculum. Communication, because that's, I mean, boy, we do a lot of communication. You all are communicators. So, you know, how do we teach people to communicate? If we have a person that we're dealing with that's not a good communicator, or that's really, really, really angry, because you do a lot of counseling, don't you? So some of the things that we need to teach them are how to solve problems, and how to you know, work with and deal through some of these things. And we can do that with strategies based on what we're teaching. Supportive learning environment, and then ongoing assessment, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So this is interesting. The Gallup poll results, and this is elementary, middle school, and high school, that 8 out of 10 students in elementary school are engaged. 6 out of 10 students in middle school are engaged. When we get to high school, only 4 out of 10. I don't have post-secondary. High school, 4 out of 10 are engaged. What do you think the difference is between elementary and high school in terms of engagement? Because I would say that in terms of effective teachers versus non-effective, because sometimes we get some that maybe aren't as effective, that's probably even throughout these 3 levels. Why would 8 of 10 elementary and 4 of 10 high school? Any ideas?
It's harder work.
It's harder work?
Yeah. I mean, you know, when you think about the level of teaching in high school versus in an elementary class, I mean, I know that kids are still, you know, if they're 7 or 8 years old or 10 years old, you know, it seems hard to them, but the type of learning is harder. You know, you've got a lot more things like math and science and biology and, you know, chemistry and those kind of classes are a lot more tough. So some kids check out because it's just too hard.
We learn in kindergarten by playing, right?
Yeah.
Learn how to play. Wasn't there a book, Everything I Learned in Kindergarten? You know, how to get along with people, how to play with people, how to work, you know, how to work as a team, how to get in line, how to. What else? What's the difference between elementary and high school in terms of engagement?
Independence on the student's part. They're dependent in elementary, they're growing in their independence.
That's true, and they like to share that independence with you. What else?
I would say it depends on the classroom, but as far as high school, not my high school, as far as what we do, and same with the Career Center. But there's a lot of research on the fact that elementary students are a lot more creative, and we suck that out of, and the life out of them by the time they get to high school. They just want to be done with it because they think it's just to get through it instead of actually learning, and that it's their education, and instead of something that's done to them, it's theirs to manage. But that's not how students go through it. They just think, I got to get through this, take my licks and go on. Right.
What are some of the social things?
That's what I was saying. I think that the older the student is, the more outside distractions they have. So by the time they're in high school, they're thinking about their job or the car or their boyfriend, girlfriend. You know, they're thinking about a lot of other things besides elementary school kids that don't have as much on their mind.
When you picture an elementary school teacher and a high school teacher, when I picture an elementary school teacher, I picture them sitting on the ground with the kids around them and doing some artwork and learning and playing and doing some of those things. Now in high school, we don't really do that. We really, really, really have to learn to build relationships, because when we build relationships with our students, they trust us, they want to learn from us, they ask us questions, and they tend to be more engaged. So elementary teachers build relationships in a different way than high school teachers. Of course, high school teachers have to be careful how they build relationships with students. But in terms of that trust and looking them in the eye, our kids, when they would come off the buses from the singing schools, we would be standing, teachers would be standing at the front door, and they'd come in, we'd make them take their hats off. I was just kind of a stickler about that. And we greet them. And so with new kids, the first year, usually they were there for 2 years, they'd come in and they kind of, you know, be like this. And then, but after a couple of weeks, they came in, they'd be like, hey, Miss Smith, hey, Mr. So-and-so, you know. And so what they did was they got that feeling that they were welcome, we want them to be there, and we looked them in the eye. And the kids would get to where they'd look you in the eye, you know, and you say, hey, I heard about that game the other night, you know, so to connect with them a little bit. And that's one of the things that you know, we got a lot of pluses from in terms of, from our kids, you know, they felt so comfortable and they felt like they were a real person and they felt like, and the same with our adults, you know, look your adults in the eye, greet them when they come in the door. So, so back to engagement, it is a little bit different, and the older our students get, the more we have to work to engage our students. And I might say with adults, there's some other things that are a little bit different. A lot of times adults are paying for their training and their education, and also adults a lot of times have a little more respect and maturity than sometimes some of our high school students do, maybe, or our middle schools, because they're a little bit more developed mentally.
Hopefully.
But it's just something that we've got to, you know, we've got to think about. Okay, what's the greatest impact? Mental engagement. So if I'm going to engage my students mentally by problem solving and higher order thinking in their mind, if I'm engaging them physically by being involved in the lesson or doing projects, or if I'm going to teach social engagement or use social engagement by them interacting with others and working in groups. So what do you think is the most important? And I'm